Thank you so much for joining us from the entire team of Career Launcher. It's great to have you with us. And with this, a very quick introduction. Sri Rohit Nandan sir was an IS officer of the 1982 batch of the UP cadre. Sir is also an alumnus of Allahabad University and holds the degree of MBA from Hull Business School, UK. In his initial years as an IS officer, he has served in UP and then joined the Government of India as the Joint Secretary Civil Aviation in 2009 and officiated as Commissioner Civil Aviation for nearly a year. Appointed as Chairman and Managing Director of Air India from 2011 to 15, exactly the time when Air India earned operating profits after a gap of nearly a decade. It was during this time that Air India joined the prestigious Star Alliance, promoted as Secretary Skill Development and Entrepreneurship in 2015. Sir held the position till January 2017 when he was superannuated. He has been a district magistrate of Farrukhabad and Manipur districts between 1990 and 1994, worked as the Principal Secretary to Chief Minister of UP and Principal Staff Officer to two Chief Secretaries posted in Home, Power, Industries, Information, Public Relations, and externally aided projects, disabled welfare, information technology, rural development, agriculture, tourism, horticulture, food processing, and sericulture departments through 1982 and 2009. Also worked as the Housing Commissioner of UP. And presently, Sir is the Vice Chairman of the UP Public Services Tribunal at Lucknow. So we welcome you once again. And this is nearly my lifetime. You know, when I recapitulate what you've done, I think I was just growing up in those years when you were making all the difference. So, welcome once again, sir. And with this, I'd also like to welcome Parthasarathi sir and introduce him as well on the panel. Uh, Parthasarathi Sen Sharma sir is an IS officer of the 1994 batch from the UP cadre again. He is currently working as Additional Secretary, Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Sir is an alumnus of the Delhi College of Engineering, now of course known as the Delhi Technical University, and holds a degree of MBA from the University of Slovenia. In his initial years as an IS officer, he has worked as a collector, chief development officer, and SDM at various locations. Sir has had many significant posts in UP state bureaucracy, such as the CEO of Greater Noida Industrial Development Authority, Commissioner of the Rural Development, Uttar Pradesh, and Project Director, Community Project, Rural Development Secretary in UP Chief Minister Office, UP, Secretary, Uttar Pradesh Secondary Education, Secretary, Additional Sources of Energy, etc. He has also worked in the corporate sector with Telco, Jamshedpur, before becoming EIS officer. Sir is a voracious reader and has authored several books himself. So I think this very humble introduction of the two gentlemen that are smiling at us from the screen today is enough to pep up all the aspirants who are watching and to take a very clear hint that there's a lot of information sharing that is going to come our way. Thank you once again to both of you for taking out time for this interview, sir. And without much ado, I'd like to start the interview if you permit, please.
Sure.
So, as we're talking about the challenges and opportunities that takes to be an IS officer, I think the first question, Rohit sir, we like to pass on to you is: was becoming an IS officer always your first career choice?
No, Neha, I wanted to be a doctor. But since I was not very good at mathematics, I found coping with the quantitative aspects of physics also rather difficult. So very realistically, I migrated to humanities after completing my senior Cambridge. At that time, for humanities students, there were not many career options. IAS was the career by default. I started preparing for the IAS, but after completing my MA, I got a job as a lecturer in Allahabad University. I got so passionately involved in my job of teaching that my resolve to appear for the IAS started wavering. At that time, something very strange happened. One of my seniors, who was also a teacher in the university, got selected for the IAS, attained a very high position. His interviews were splashed in all the newspapers, and he said that teaching is a job for the IAS, reject. So that enraged the academic community of Allahabad. My father, who was a judge, wanted me to become an IAS officer. So he took the opportunity and he said, now this is a challenge for you. You appear for the IAS, get selected, and after that you can take a decision. So I appeared for the IAS, but before my results could be announced, my father passed away. So there was a deep division in the family whether I should continue in academics or should I join the civil services. Nobody in my family has ever gone for government service. Everyone has either been in academics or in judiciary or in politics. I was the first person that appeared for the examination in my family. But ultimately, although I was in a dilemma, I decided to fulfill the wishes of my father and join the IAS. I would like to hasten to act that not for a single moment I ever regretted this decision. I have had a very fulfilling and a very satisfied life. It is a brilliant career. Thank you.
Wonderful, sir. And I think all the students who come from the humanities background must be all smiles right now, because this is a very common question that comes to us. Everybody feels it is only science that can make the do the wonders. So I'm sure that is something that is going to be a takeaway, along with the other things in the answer. Partha sir, civil services has always been connected with power, with fame. How does life actually change in real sense after one becomes a civil servant or an IAS officer?
Thank you, Neha. It is a pleasure to be here with you and Rohit sir and with all the young people. Coming to your question, I think in the life of an IS officer, there are two distinct phases. One is the assignments that he does in the field, so-called field, when he's SDM, CDO, collector, even commissioner. And the other part is when he is working in the state capital or in the national capital in the policy making or bodies. So these two lives are quite different. When you talk about the power and the glamour, these things are actually in the first phase of your life when you are the face of the state in a district and you are very known, you are very in the public eyes, and everything you do is in the public eye, you are in the local newspapers every day. So that is the phase of life that most of the aspirants also think as an IS officer's life. But it is good to understand that that is only one third of your career. The two-thirds of your career most probably would be in the state capitals and the national capital, where you will be the proverbial anonymous bureaucrat who will be working in a chamber, making a difference, but the power and glory and that glamour is not going to be there. So that is how the life of an IS officer is actually, if you take the entire career of 36 or 35 years. Yeah.
Very well answered, sir. And I think, yes, when we speak to school students, especially, we ask them, why are you planning civil service? I think they very candidly tell us it is about fame and power and the respect, the authority that comes along with it. But there's a lot of responsibility also that we understand that it carries. So, Rohit, sir, would you please throw some light on the fact that what are the roles and responsibilities apart from just glitz and glamour? And is there something called a work-life balance that they're left with eventually?
See, I personally feel that the glitz and glamour is only very temporary, and as Parsarthi has said, it is only in the initial phase of your life. Max Weber, when he talked about bureaucracy, said that bureaucracy has to be anonymous. They are supposed to be the backroom boys. They are the ones who are actually helping the government in governance, but they are not seen and they are not visible to the people. The life of an IS officer is full of responsibility. He is saddled with responsibilities. Before he becomes an IS officer, he's a free citizen. But immediately after joining the IAS, he becomes committed to the constitution of the country. He has to take an oath of secrecy, which nibbles away large parts of his freedom. He becomes the focus of expectations and hopes of the people, and he has to respond to them. So the glamour and glitz part is only the superficial part of it. The real governance, the real power is enjoyed with the people, as Parsarthi said, in the sitting in the secretariat, formulating laws, formulating rules, making policies, mobilizing resources for the implementation of those policies, managing cadres, making rules, service rules. They are the ones who actually exercise real power, but they're not visible. As far as the life of an IS officer and the responsibilities are concerned, I would like to say a few things that initially when you join the service, you immediately are vested with a lot of power. Now, at the age of 24, 25, you become a subdivisional magistrate and you have tremendous powers in your hand. Mind you, nobody else in the world perhaps has the life of life and death. In a crisis situation, you can even order firing. This is a part that you have got to exercise with a lot of equanimity and moderation. You cannot allow it to go to your head. You are also responsible for the welfare of a couple of lakhs of people as a subdivision magistrate. At the age of 24, 25, 26, 27, whatever it is, you are looking after the lives of nearly 2 lakh people in your subdivision. Now, they are looking at you with hope and expectation. You have to respond. You have got to be very decisive. You have got to take the responsibility that these people live a good life. Then you also, the moment you get into the IAS, you become a part of a hierarchy. You cease to be an independent individual. There are people working under you, there are people working above you. And you have got to maintain a balance between the two of them. You have to take care of your subordinates. You've got to get work out of them, but at the same time, you have to provide a support system to your superiors. So therefore, you must have that ability of coordination. You become a part of a team. You are not alone in the district. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you?
Yes, sir. Very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
Right. All right. So you start working in a team. Therefore, you have got to develop qualities of coordination and collaboration with a spirit of accommodation. A very important aspect of an IAS officer's life and responsibilities, and that is also a challenge, is that he has to deal with politicians and public representatives. Now, the problem is that most of the officers suffer from a stereotype. We all have been taught that, or we have learned that politicians are not good people, perhaps they interfere in our work, but it is not so. We have got to accept that they are part of the constitutional system of governance, they are our partners, and they have got to be treated as such. There is no sense in unnecessarily being in a state of continuous combat with them. At the same time, you don't have to be servile, you have got to maintain a very healthy balance with them, try to take their suggestions, which need not be interference in all times. An important part of IAS officer's life is now dealing with the media. Well, when we were young and I was undergoing training at Mussoorie, we were told that we should not interact with the press. IAS officers were supposed to be anonymous. They were not supposed to be seen. Any officer who spoke to the journalist was considered to be suffering from the disease of what is called chapas, the desire for publicity. Times have changed. Today, media is all pervasive. You cannot avoid the media. And there's no reason why you should avoid the media. So you have got to develop talent to deal with the media of all types, print, electronic, and digital now. You have got to see that you keep them at a very respectable distance, neither too close nor too far, so that you can get that they can get a good picture of you. It is like a camera. If you go too far, your picture gets blurred. If you come too close, it again gets blurred. You have got to be at the focal point, and this is a very delicate balance that has got to be struck. Lastly, you have to do a lot of public speaking that you must understand, and therefore you have got to be very communicative. This is one of the challenges that IAS officers have. Many people are very stage shy, and they have got to develop the talent of speaking to the press, speaking on the public platform very often. So the life of an IAS officer is completely changed the moment he joins the service. It's a life-changing event.
Sir, beautifully answered, sir. I think it just does not reflect what goes on into the day of a civil service servant, but also his life. I think you've very beautifully put it across. Some keywords: leadership, collaboration, cooperation. Yes, one has to be prepared to face media, as you say, and deal with both the ends. So thank you so much for covering it so well, sir. But this raises another question, Partha sir, that we like to share with ask you. That though it very clearly reflects in Rohit sir's answer, but just to put it in words for the aspirants, what is the most satisfying aspect of being a civil servant, of being an IAS officer?
I think most of the people will tell you that in the IAS, you get a scope and scale of work, especially in some of the assignments where you can make a difference to the life of people. The scope and scale is actually incomparable to any other job probably in the world, which is a salaried job. You can be a politician, of course, but otherwise, for a salaried job, I don't think you have any other job in which the scale and scope of making a difference is so much. It may not be in all assignments, though. In your career of 36 years, you may have some assignments in which you have such scope. In certain assignments, the scope may be lesser. Having said that, the other very interesting and very satisfying part of this IS life is the diversity of the assignments. In no other assignment in service, you will have such diversity of assignments coming to you. So you will be one day in fertilizer sector, and the other day in the culture sector, and the third day you will be in the electricity department, and the fourth day in the information public relations department. I don't think in the world there is any other service which gives you so much of diversity of assignments. But it is also a challenge because every time you are expected to learn and start delivering from the first day, which is just not possible. You have to learn the ropes of the game every time, every assignment. So it is a huge responsibility and it's a huge challenge. But if you have the attitude for it, it can be a great fun also to go through all these different assignments.
I think you've
Yeah.
nailed it. So the word is the attitude and the aptitude both. I think that we'll probably have to look at. But you've also had a very very diverse portfolio, as we just read out and saw. So, sir, going with all the different experiences that you've had in your career, what you feel are some very important traits or qualities, characteristics that an aspirant must own, when he's thinking of civil services or planning in civil services. And this I ask you out of your very personal experiences. You may even share some challenges that you've had, and you felt that probably, this is one quality that everybody must have if they're entering this field. Back to you, Parth.
Yeah. I think I'm not saying that I have all those qualities. I'm just trying to say what qualities people should have.
Yeah, that's what we want to know from you, sir.
It does not really mean that I have all those qualities. The one quality I think is to be resilient and not to turn cynical. There will be many, many negative episodes which will come in life, not only in the life of an IS officer, but in every other life too. And one has to have this resilience and this ability to put the next foot forward. This is not only true for an IS officer's life, it is true for every other life. So
So
over the
true.
life, as you grow old, you understand this, that this is one quality that you must have to have an attitude of putting the next foot forward. I think Rohit sir has covered most of the qualities that an IS officer should have. Uh, this is one quality that I wanted to bring forward, and also a quality that one should have apart from the service, other passions or other interests in life. This is very important, in my opinion, not only to keep a work life balance, but also to keep your sanity and to keep your perspective. For example, I think if you read, if you write, if you travel, if you listen to people, your perspective broadens. And if your perspective broadens, you become a better human being. And if you become a better human being, you become a better officer. So that is one trap one should not fall in, that you are the center of the world. And you have come to change the world. Nobody changed the world, neither the Roman emperors did, nor the president of US did, nor the prime minister of India would do. So let us know that the perspective is, I think, important to have. Yeah.
Excellent, sir. Very well answered. I'm sure everybody listening to you is smiling and making notes at the same time, because these are things I think that we've known, but we often miss in life. And as you've said, I think they're innate to various careers, or maybe all of them. And you say better people make better officers. I think I can't agree more than that. Thank you so much, sir. Rohit, sir, you've been here for a very long time, and I'm sure you've seen lots of changes in your professional journey. How has the bureaucracy evolved from the time you've joined till now? And what are some of the very significant changes that it has brought along in the life of an IS officer? We'd like to know from you, sir.
Well, I joined the service in 1982, retired in 2017, and am still working in some capacity where I am working very closely with IS officers. I have seen that the system has evolved. But in spite of the evolution, one can say with some degree of confidence that the functions that the bureaucracy was supposed to perform in 1982, it is still expected to perform. The expectations of the people are also very similar. What has changed is the environment in which an IS officer or the bureaucracy now works. Today, we have got a very proactive judiciary, a very intrusive and a very vigilant press. The political executive has become far more assertive than it used to be earlier. I remember of a time when if a file was put up by an IS officer, it was signed without any question. Things have changed. Now we have got very educated ministers, people who want to reach out to their own constituency according to the ideologies that they follow, and therefore they are more assertive. There are many people, as a fact, I've worked with ministers who feel that IS officers don't know much about the field, and they would like to fill in that gap. So therefore, we now have a very assertive political political bosses. Then the importance of social media also has got to be taken note of. Every action of the government, every action of an officer is now being evaluated on a real-time basis. This never was not happening earlier. And the officers are not considered to be responsible for the decisions of the government. Today, one wrong move by anyone, and you will feel and you will see that your Facebook or Instagram or everything is full of comments against you. Besides that, there are many other changes that have taken place, especially certain very progressive legislations, which have limited the responsibilities that the IS officers have to perform, the area of independence, the Right to Information Act, the right to education, right to food, right to work. These were things which were otherwise considered to be discretionary. Today, they are a matter of right, and the IS officers and the bureaucracy has got to adjust itself to this reality. Two recent things that have taken place are the 360-degree evaluation of IS officers and senior bureaucrats, which has introduced an element of uncertainty. Earlier, our performances were evaluated by our superiors who knew us from very close quarters. Now, we are being evaluated on the basis of comments of people whom we do not even have met. So very often there is a possibility of some subjectivity in it. And lastly, the new phenomenon of lateral entry has, I think, so changed the character of the bureaucracy, and IS officers now have a competition within the government.
So double-edged razors, as we are treading all the time, is what we can make out with your answer. It is a very tough job indeed, just not glitz and glamour to everybody who's listening to us. And this is a very close insight and a deep opportunity, a great opportunity to peep into the lives and understand what you're headed for. So I think students, let's do our homework once again. In between, sir, there are certain student queries that are coming in. And Partha, sir, we like to share one with you. And it's a very interesting one, a very common one. We know UPSC, we know civil services as one of the knowledge-based tests, and it worries everybody as to what is the definition of a good student and what are the chances an average student holds when he sits for an exam like this. So if you could please answer this for us. The student wants to know that is there a chance for an average student as well?
I think, let us be, my experience shows that if you have a good academic background, it definitely helps. If you just look at the number of the people who have joined the IS over the years and what academic background they had, majority of them would have been very, very good students in their college. Having said that, it is not impossible for an average student to clear the exams, but he or she has to do so much more and has to work so much more than an otherwise good student.
So, sir, apart from just the knowledge, what are the other, different stages or different qualities that the test is actually evaluating in an aspirant?
I would say that one most important is to understand is that in the exams, the questions are no longer knowledge based. Even in our times, it was not. The questions are more of an analytical questions in which they expect you to think and come to conclusion and logically explain your conclusions. That is something which is very, very important. Knowledge is fine, but that is assumed to be something which you must have anyway. The additional difference is how you use the knowledge, apply it to situations, and analyze and come out with logical answers. What students many times miss is that what your knowledge is not being tested. Your answer is being tested, what you've written on the paper. They don't know what your knowledge you have. What you have written is what is being evaluated. So I would definitely say that a lot of practice should go in writing answers to possible questions rather than only reading. I think the more you practice writing those kind of answers, thinking on your feet, what you call, and analyzing the question, take the questions of the last few years and try writing them, the answers, probably do a peer review of your answers. That I think is very, very important because at the end of the day, the examiner is evaluating your answer, not what is in your mind.
So true, sir. So you're saying that the quality of your answer will actually probably give a little perspective to the examiner, that who is on the other side, and where is the person coming from. So I think that's a very good suggestion that is being made, and the aspirant should quickly start working on this and see how we can draft better answers there. Rohit, sir, COVID has affected life everywhere. And as an IS officer, how do you see the role that your fraternity has played in dealing with this crisis? And what do you say is the way ahead?
Well, Neha, first of all, I would like to compliment everyone, whether be it the medical community or the bureaucracy who have been handling the COVID for the last nearly 1.5 years.
Indeed, sir.
I think they deserve to be congratulated and complimented for the tremendous work that they have done. We should not try to dishearten them. But yes, just like nothing succeeds like success, nothing fails like failure. During the last phase of COVID, we have seen a lot of disappointments. Things could have been better, they could have been better handled. And the people are more angry because they feel that the type of management that could have taken place has not actually happened. Now, if I was to analyze as to what went wrong, I would feel that the IS officers and the bureaucracy reacted to this crisis in exactly the same way they would react in any other situation. There was too much of regulation. People were being asked for certificates to run from place to place, wait for a full day at some center to get a certificate of the CMO to get admission to a hospital. Now, this was not required at this time. At this time, the people were traumatized, families were traumatized, things which should have been made very simple and decentralized. Unfortunately, this did not happen. It happened, and I think so in Bombay. I've been told that it was much better in Bombay, where the whole thing was decentralized. Every ward had an office where you could go and put in your problems, and you will be given solutions. The second important thing was that there was a complete failure to use technologies. In Delhi, in the first phase, this was done that people were told which bed is available in which hospital. This was not done in the second phase. People were just completely running from pillar to post trying to find out where can they get a bed or where they can get oxygen. Now, there was technology available to the bureaucracy and to the officers, and they should have utilized it optimally. The third was, again, a typical bureaucratic approach to the thing, a complete lack of human touch. The bureaucracy was not seen anywhere. I did not hear of any district magistrate going out to meet people and see whether they were being treated well. I did not hear of district magistrates and commissioners visiting of hospitals to see what was happening in the hospitals. Fourthly, we completely failed to use the public representatives. I've said that public representatives are our partner in governance. They must be used optimally. The public representatives were missing, the bureaucracy was missing, and that is what was paining the people most. And lastly, there was a complete lack of decentralization. I was also amazed at the fact that this was not anticipated. We have been dealing with the disasters always for a very, very long time. We always know that when there is a disaster, when there's a shortage for anything, there would be a black marketing. No efforts were made to control that black marketing. Oxygen was being sold, remdesivir was being sold, injections and other medicines were being sold at exorbitant prices. People were coming from Pune, from Bangalore to Lucknow to buy medicines. Oh, this was a ridiculous situation. This could have been foreseen, and this could have been controlled. I think that there was a major failure on this part.
Very well put, sir. I think as somebody who's faced it on the other side, I think we all totally agree with everything that you've raised. And yes, leaves us with a lot of food for thought every time this discussion comes up.
Incidentally, Neha, both Parthsarthi and I both have suffered COVID.
Oh, all right, sir. But we are
had
very
nasal
happy to see you
patients
hale
of
and hearty and with us today. And we pray that you continue blossoming in good health always. Partha sir, I'm coming to you with a very different question. We are deviating from the discussion, but this is something I must ask you because everybody wants to know this for sure. How does one manage to keep the consistency and motivation during the IS preparation? I must ask you this, before we conclude, because this is somewhere where we see a huge drop that happens mostly. Over to you, sir.
I think there can be simple one fit solution for everybody. Every individual is different, and one has to go inside deep to find his own motivation. I can only say from my experience that when I gave the exam for the first time, after the mains, I didn't clear the mains. I was in a situation in which I was working with the Tatas, as you had pointed out, and I had a job of 7 to 5 in the day. and in the remaining of the time only I could study for the civil service. So it was difficult, and for the first exam I just could not finish the entire syllabus. So that is one thing I must tell my young friends, that you must finish the entire syllabus. So because you don't know what question will come from which side. So I could not just finish the syllabus, and I could not clear the mains. So it was a disappointment. Now, as I see it from today, it was a disappointment which should not have been a disappointment much, because I had just not finished the syllabus and I should have prepared for the second attempt. But yes, it was a disappointment. For 1.5 months, uh, I was very disappointed and despondent. And then I picked it up again for the second attempt, and I cleared the exam in the second attempt. So in the people who are today listening to me and Rohit sir, there will be many who would have given the exam, failed once, or not been able to clear twice, thrice. But once you are clear that this is the job for you, this is the career choice for you, and this is where we have been trying to tell the people that the job of the IAS officer has its plus and minus, and it is not for everybody, and it need not be for everybody. But once you have decided that this is the career choice for you, then please go ahead and give your whole hog. It is not one of those exams that you can do with 2-3 hours study in a day and then just hope that you'll clear the exam. It requires a lot of efforts, and it requires a lot of resilience. It requires a lot of resilience, because there is a chance that you will not clear it in the first attempt. It is you will not clear it in the second attempt. But to continue starting from the prelims again, the mains is a difficult thing. But if you think that it is a career choice, then please go ahead, be resilient and consistent in your approach. Over to you, Neha.
Wonderful, sir. I think resilience is something that we've been hearing time and again, and that goes out as, I think, a very clear message to everybody who's hearing you. And Rohit, sir, now that we are concluding the interview, I'd like to put this back to you and request you to please give that one last message to all the aspirants that are hearing you today for preparing for the exam now.
Surely, Neha, my advice to the aspirants would be, first of all, don't be obsessed with the IAS. There are many career options today which were not available to us earlier. So therefore, for us, it was a matter of do or die. Either we appeared for the, got into the IAS, or became a clerk. Today, it is not so. Today, there are so many options available to people, and I think that you should not get obsessed that if you don't get into the IAS, the world is going to end, and it is not going to happen. Don't judge your self-worth, and not let others judge your worth on basis of your success in the IAS examination. Second, don't come with wrong notions to the service. If you're coming to the IAS only for glamour and for power and prestige, you will be disappointed. Both Parth and I have said that this is only a phase of your career. This is not the career. So don't come with that expectation. Thirdly, never come with intention of financial enrichment. IAS has been held in such high esteem by the people because it has generally been perceived to be a service of honest people. If you have got any intentions of earning money by getting into the IAS, please do not enter into service. Lastly, try to maintain your ideological purity as well as your ideological neutrality. It is very easy to nowadays veer towards the right or towards the left. This is not what an IAS officer is expected to do. Your career is not of 5 years. Your career is not for one government or two governments. You're going to serve many governments in the years to come. Even while studying, be very careful that you're not exposed to literature or to such influences which ideologically prejudice your mind. Come with complete neutrality. IAS people are supposed to be neutral, and you will be doing great injustice to yourself and to the system if you come with any ideological commitments. I would only also say that yes, it is a marathon. It is not an easy examination. It is a very difficult examination. I was one of the very lucky few who was able to cross in the first attempt itself. I never intended to actually appear for the second time. I had taken a clear decision that if I don't clear in the first attempt, I will not appear. I had a job already. So most of you are qualified people, engineers, doctors, MBAs. You have a life to ahead of you with or without the IAS. Take it normally, take it like a normal human being, behave normally. I'm sure that if you remain consistent in your studies, if you behave normally, if you remain motivated throughout this period of time, you will succeed, and you will succeed very well. My best wishes to all of you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that was a very important message because somewhere, like you've called it the marathon, people forget, everything apart from the marathon. And I think it's a very important reminder that yes, life is probably all about where you reach ultimately, and sometimes it's already pre-decided for all you know. So we can only give it our best. So with this, I think I'm going to conclude this interview. And so, both of you, the entire platform has been reverberating with your knowledge and experience. It has been one of the best interviews that I have conducted personally, and we are very, very, grateful to the two of you, because I think everything that you shared came not just from experience but from your hearts. And I'm sure the aspirants have also received it in the same manner, and they will start working and reworking on various aspects that we've picked today. I wish that this conversation could go on for longer, because it's engaging and it's really intriguing, and I don't wish to conclude, but yes, that's the scheme of the day. So thank you very much to Rohit sir and Parthasarathy sir for taking out time and sharing this beautiful journey with all the aspirants. Thank you, aspirants, for keenly engaging and asking all your questions as well. And I'm going to give this back to Himanshu to
Thank you.
conclude. And thank you very much, Rohit sir and Partha sir, once again. Over to you, Himanshu.